The alarming state of South Africa's Air Force has come to light, revealing that only 6 out of 330 aircraft are currently operational. This raises serious concerns about the country's ability to defend itself or be involved in peace missions in the region. Well, joining us in the studio to discuss this pressing issue is defense analyst Kobus Marais. Hi, Kobus. Thanks again for joining us.
Hi, Linda. As always, a privilege and an honor to speak to you and your viewers.
When we look at that figure, 6 out of 330 aircraft, that is shocking. So can you sort of provide us with a breakdown of the aircraft of the South African fleet and which ones are operational?
One must just put that figures in perspective. Sometimes people interpret that as the only ones that are flying, and there's nothing going on, in between that and the operational stuff. Yes, we are in an absolute dire position in terms of fully operational, in other words, defense readiness, ready aircraft. There's no doubt about that. We know the Rooivalk, which is our most lethal helicopter and has played a pivotal role in the past to defeat the M23s and to give the proper air support to our soldiers. We know it's already a relatively old aircraft because it comes from the Angola, on the last legs of the Angolan War. That was developed and manufactured for South African Defence Force, and it played a pivotal role. There's no doubt about that. So we need an upgrade on the Rooivalk, and there's many of the weapon systems and the communication and avionics that is outdated and that need to be upgraded. The Oryx helicopter is the workhorse of the Defence Force. That's the helicopter that are used for evacuations, for medevacs. That's the helicopter that is necessary for logistical replenishments, ammunition, food, etc. for deployed soldiers. That is the workhorse that must carry and transport soldiers on the land borders. That is the vehicle that we need for search and rescue in mountainous areas, but also on the maritime side. And we have lost that capability to a very, very large extent. There is one that is supposed to be always on standby for VIP. In other words, the president, the vice president, when they need to be transported somewhere in South Africa where there's not a landing strip, or where security reasons by road might require for them to use that helicopter. I know that about 2 years ago I was able to get that released to come down to Cape Town to do the help with the fires and to put out the fires, the veld fires. So we have got a few Oryx that came out of the Nel Aeronautics over the last couple of weeks. Those 2 of that were flown up to the northern part of Zambia. So that, I suppose, is as a backup for when our soldiers need to be transported out of Goma and Sake, provided the negotiations are successful. We have got 3 Oryx in the DRC. One is the one that is still in Goma, that has been damaged by non-friendly fire, also about a year or 2 ago. And then the other 2 were flown up to Beni, but those can fly, but they are not serviceable. They are in urgent need of a major service. Mm-hmm. And we know that all our aircraft, some of them are flying, but they are not defense ready. So in other words, they can't be deployed in a conventional warfare evacuation situation, because you still have the situation that the OEMs of those aircraft can withdraw the compliance certificates if they are not properly maintained and if that is not kept up to date. We have seen what has happened with the Inkwazi a week or so ago when the OEM demanded the aircraft be left on the ground until they have complied with certain, and that was only administrative requirements to complete to assure the OEM that things has been done according to the prescripts and the manuals. So yes, there are, but we are in a dire state. We also know, for instance, the Lynx helicopters. The 4 Lynx are linked to the 4 frigates. So I know that there is one Lynx that is flying, but and is probably linked with the frigate that has been, sailing up the east coast. Now that is not a fully operational frigate. The other 3 are still in the dockyard, and it means that they've got little motivation to get the other 3 up and running and defense ready as well. So besides that, we've got a number of other helicopters that can fly and that is flying, but very few or little or nothing of them is really defense ready, operational, fully serviceable. We know that the situation with the C-130. That is a very, very old aircraft. We know that there are one that they have been busy with upgrades over the last year and a half in the UK. And hopefully that one will be reintroduced, during this year or next year. And then apparently, they want to go for the others as well. But in the meantime, hundreds of millions of rands are spent on chartering, especially Illusion aircraft. As a sometimes daily charters between South Africa and Lubumbashi these days, or in the past to Goma. So in terms of our immediate needs, we are in a dire situation. And if you can't protect your airspace, if you can't do maritime patrols by aircraft for our vast, about 3,000 kilometer coastline and our maritime responsible area, of which the surface is bigger than our land surface. And if you can't give this a proper support to your soldiers on our land borders, then, you are in a very, very bad situation. What we have had in the past is whenever soldiers were deployed, especially in the DRC, there were always and that was a precondition from South Africa, that the Oryx must be available and the Rooivalk must be there to provide the air support. I recall when I was in the DRC in 2018, we were transported with 2 Oryx, and from Beni more into the danger zones, we were escorted by 2 Rooivalk. So that was always the kind of protocol that they've used whenever they go into the red zone to do, replenishments of ammunition or whatever they might be need from a logistical point of view. They were always escorted by 2 Rooivalk, and that means that their safety was that much more secure. So yes, we are in an absolute dire situation. You will recall from the defense acquisition program, of the late 90s, that was part of the so-called scandal of the ammunition and the procurement problems that we've had in the Zuma era. That only 2 of the Gripens are fully serviceable and can be used. Now, sometimes those weapon systems are aged and is not up to date. However, mostly we use the Gripens for air shows, to be ready, but that's only 2. So you can do very little with that. And even if they need to fly them up to, for instance, the DRC for air support, they will need to land somewhere for refueling. So it's a very, very expensive exercise. And the same with the Hawks. That is more of a training aircraft, but can be used in a offensive role as well. So that is just totally inadequate. And the same we find with the Pilatus training aircraft in Air Force Base Langebaanweg, where there's about 5 or 6. But with that, you can't have a proper training program. So until we get to a stage where you can increase those aircraft, you can reintroduce a proper a training program. In the meantime, we know that they have always tried to jump back to the Cubans. And we know that in the past, the so-called training of pilots in Cuba was a disaster because most of them that have returned to South Africa had to do a further course for qualifications to fly in South Africa with our aircraft. The other problem with the Air Force specifically is the budget is obviously a problem, and the provision of flying hours for the pilots and the aircrew to comply with what we refer to as the currency requirements. So that's the competency accreditation confirmation. And that means that, if you fly in certain circumstances, for instance, a mountainous terrain, do search and rescue or do training or do offensive work, you need to be qualified and be tested and be accredited to be able to do that. For instance, I've heard this morning that, yes, there are some of the Augustas that is flying, but there's not always crew available. Now, that means that, if you haven't got crew available, then it doesn't matter how much aircraft you've got. But if there's not an incentive for aircrew, pilots, and flight engineers and others to actually stay in the Defence Force and in the Air Force specifically, then there's very little that you can do, because then you sit with a lot of inexperienced aircraft pilots and aircrew, and that obviously doesn't help us. So we need a combination of all of these things to work together. You can't have just aircraft or just aircrew, but not with aircraft. Then you can do some of your currencies, but you can't use that. And if you can't fly a minimum number of flying hours in a year, you've got challenges. And the international regulations and requirements and standards for pilots is very much applicable on South Africa as well. And the budget that we have received just now from the Minister of Finance is not helping either. It is in real terms, it's a decrease in budget, whereas in fact we are needing a much significant, in real terms, increase to be able to just catch up with what we have lost. It's a dire situation. It's not a lockdown necessarily yet. We are not at the point that we will become a air wing, but those are the fears and the threats. That if national government and the National Treasury do not see and realize the importance of just the Air Force. Remember, then we haven't touched on the Navy, we haven't touched on the Army and the medical services. If they don't realize that you need a strong Defence Force, a capable Defence Force that can act as a deterrent, but can also act when you need them to protect our country and our soldiers, then that has got a serious impact on the kind of democracy that you can actually establish and maintain and grow and develop over years to come.
What are the dangers that South Africa could be in if it doesn't have an effective Air Force, Navy, or Army?
Well, just to start, point one, if you look at the instability in the Red Sea, the effect that had on in the enormous amount of commercial maritime traffic around South Africa. Now, in terms of international treaties, we are responsible for the whole maritime area down to the Prince Edward Islands and Antarctica for any search and rescue or a disaster situation. Furthermore, if you can't protect your own coastline from threats from the ocean, then you are in serious trouble. Now, in the past, 35 Squadron was responsible for the maritime patrol and reconnaissance services of the whole coastline and the EEZ, maritime terrain. Project, the Ocean Economy Project, is supposed to be a very important economic driver for the government, but which they have neglected. And we know that we've got enormous resources below the water, but currently we've got nothing to protect that and to make sure that where there are culprits, that they are apprehended. So for that you need an air force, but you also need a capable, Navy. We must remember that our land borders are our primary responsibility at this stage. But if you can't transport and move your soldiers, replenishments, logistical support, and things like that by air, how on earth will you do that? It's nearly 3,000 kilometers of land borders as well. And then obviously, you need your airspace to be protected. Now you can do that with aircraft, but you can also do that with a space program. And often the space program is very expensive, so you don't necessarily need to do that on your own. You can do that in partnerships. Then, obviously, in terms of the regional safety and security, we know what's going on in Mozambique. That threat is certainly migrating downwards, south, and that is will have a serious threat to us. So you need all your services. And the moment that you've got soldiers being deployed, you need air support in terms of logistics, but also firepower, lethal firepower. And you need aircraft for your parabats training, but also operational, your special forces, and also your airborne, infantry units. So those are the things that is very important. Also remember, for any defense force, ours the same, it acts as a deterrent. So if nobody fears, your firepower, whether it's land, air, or by sea, they will abuse you, as I am sure we are abused at the moment. But when you've got a competent air force, when you've got a competent defense force, those will think twice, because you will be able then to catch them. But for that, you obviously need not only Air Force and Navy, you need technology as well. So you need the latest technology, you need preferably satellite technology, even if that is done in partnership with, for instance, the UK or the USA or one of the other European Union countries, which is our most important trading partners. And remember, it's also not only just for us that needs protection, but it's also for investors. I think no international investor wants to invest his money, into a unsafe country, or where they are not certain and guaranteed that they can do business, they can risk their money, and they know that they will get a return, because safety plays a role. In the cases where that is absent, you will see that there's very little or no really in fixed capital investment that takes place. Very little job creation takes place, and it's only raw materials like minerals and things like that gets harvested and exported. So the defense force plays a multitude of roles. But most importantly for us, our departure point is, what does our Constitution say the role of the defense force is? And that is, it must protect our country's sovereignty and must assure the safety of our people. So, and everything you need to bring back to that. And if there are doubts, or if there are questions, and if there are responses that you cannot do that, then obviously it's a breach of our constitutional mandate and obligation.
So what kind of budget do we need to fix this, to fix specifically the Air Force?
Fixing will happen over a number of years. From a pragmatic point of view, there's no ways that we can afford what we actually need and require. So you'll have to do it over a number of years. Now, in my opinion, if government acts promptly and responsibly, they can certainly find the money for at least a 1% of GDP defense budget. provided that that defense budget gets totally restructured and reprioritized. There are many, many expenses, in my opinion, which has been inherited over from years and years, and they don't cut those expenses. So you can cut so much of the expenses, and then you will have funds to apply to where it is most needed. And with aircraft and naval vessels, and in fact, any prime mission equipment, including technology, you will need a multi-year program to not only replace, but to upgrade in many cases. I mean, we sit with Silvermine, which is supposed to be the ultimate and the most important from a communication and radar perspective in Simonstown, or just outside Simonstown in Newsenburg. And we know that has been dilapidated to such an extent that you can't really rely on them. You have to rely on private sector, facilities to help them. So things like that need to be upgraded and need to be brought up to standard. I always say that if you are a few steps behind your adversaries in terms of prime mission equipment and technology, you will never beat them. So you'll have to be at least on the same level or in a more advanced level to make sure that they don't break through your defensive lines. We have now seen that in the DRC, even the M23s had more advanced weapon systems than what we have got. And I remember we were at one stage the most advanced defense force on the African continent, even in the world. But even in Africa, rebel groups have got better technology and equipment than what we have got. And that is actually painting a very bleak picture. But it's not all lost. We have got enormous capable people. There are people that we need to get rid of, but there are so many of the defense force soldiers and even generals that are very, very capable. Some of them are relatively young, but I don't have a problem with age. If you are good enough, you are old enough, or if you're good enough, you are young enough. So I think once we have moved through this last of the old MK struggle stalwarts, then hopefully you will get into a phase where people will get appointed not based on their MK allegiance in the years before democracy, but rather on what you have got available, whether it's black or white, it doesn't matter. In terms of the numbers, the most are non-white. So I haven't got a problem with that, because if you're good enough, doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. And I've got a respect for so many of the generals and senior staff members and NCOs, ordinary soldiers of all races. We need them all. That is very important. But whether they will get the opportunities, I remember in one meeting many years ago, the then Minister of Defense, when confronted with, we need a succession plan to bring in younger people much quicker, her response was, no, they must wait. They haven't been in the trenches like we were in the trenches, so they will have to wait until we are not there anymore, which is obviously a ridiculous argument, which means that, when you don't appoint on merit, and when you, especially leaders, then you've got a problem. And that's maybe why I've said many times, two things that you need very much, and that is political will and management will. Not to proceed with what was a failure in the past, but to think out of the box, to think in terms of our current threats and future threats. And if your intelligence is up to date, which we know is a major problem in South Africa, and it's reliable, and you also should work with your partners, your most important partners, international partners, then you will be at the forefront of what is required. And if you can do those developments early on, in partnership also with our defense sector. We have had a PPP meeting conference the other day, specifically how the defense sector can partner with the defense force to fill up the gaps and making sure that they are still, again, retain or regain that strength that they've had and that we actually need. There are so many committed companies and very highly competent companies in South African defense sector that I've got no doubt that if we partner with them, we can address many of our challenges. Even the funding, some of them are strong enough that they will allow you to, for instance, do a multi-year funding or a financing program as well. And you don't need them to pay in 1 year. That can even be done. But just for instance, I mean, Milkor is one company that has got this 380 a UAV that they have designed and developed, and that aircraft has got a 3,000 kilometer distance that it can fly. So you can sit in Cape Town, you can fly that aircraft. Obviously, making sure that if you need to land and refill, then you can do that. But you can actually sit in Cape Town and do the whole South African coastline with that one aircraft. And it's got all the technology, and you can add on technology and even weapon systems as well. So those things are available. We know that there's one company in South Africa who's even manufactured a light reconnaissance aircraft, Paramount. So and many of them have got technology, the best technology in the world, because their technology gets exported predominantly and gets used by mostly NATO partners. So many of the highly developed technology that you will find in their weapon systems and the prime mission equipment comes from South Africa. So we can do it. There must just be the political will and the management will to say, no business as usual. We must think out of the box, even if we must start with new leaders and get them, to lead us into the future. Then I'm absolutely positive that it can be done, but there's a few conditions.
So, Kobus, are you saying there's a massive gap between South Africa's defense ability, which is rich in the private sector, and our defense force, and that the government is not using the ability that exists in South Africa?
Absolutely, without any doubt. I mean, just take the project Hoofyster for one. I mean, there are off-the-shelf vehicles very, very similar to the Badger, which is a project done with I think it's Swedish or Finnish company, Patria, and those are available off the shelf in South Africa and some of the number of these companies in South Africa. Now look at the amount of money that Denel had to invest in drivetrains, in certain chassis and certain pieces of equipment that is still at Denel Landwork. But because the money is not there to build the rest of the vehicle, those cannot be used. If it was from a South African manufacturer and supplier, none of that investment and wastage would have been necessary. So yes, there's a major gap. And we also know that the South African defense companies, they need the local defense force to actually use their equipment that helps them with their marketing abroad, but also help them with research and development to make sure that they always provide the kind of technology and equipment that we in South Africa need, but that they can also adjust, to serve the interests of their foreign customers.
So other countries are actually benefiting by our defense industry, and not South Africa.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Remember, European Union is very active in South Africa. British companies, German companies, French companies are very, very active here. From Finland and Sweden, but also further on, they Hensoldt and Reutech has got some of the best technologies that you can imagine. So yes, they are. And if you currently look at the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, UAE, sometimes most of those staff are South African. I've heard the other day that if you turn up there for a management meeting or a board meeting, don't be surprised if the whole meeting is in Afrikaans. So and many of those are people that has worked with Danell Dynamics, with Danell Landward Aeronautics, mostly the Danell companies that we've lost that brain power and capabilities.
Kobus Marais, thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. It was a pleasure talking to you. But I'm positive.